Hello and welcome back everybody. So today I'm gonna talk about Dr. Stone because as of late this series has been one of the best series that I've read like week to week, in the sense that previously I would have said, My Hero Academia is my favorite series of all time, or at least my currently ongoing favorite series. But recently, with the week to week great chapters from Dr. Stone and the great consistency we've been getting from every chapter, especially this year, because this year has been an absolutely phenomenal year for Dr. Stone, I wanted to kind of talk about the future because it is something that I know a lot of people, or at least some people, have been speculating on, especially given the last chapter that we got, which was chapter 77 by the time I released this video, where it kind of mentioned the climax of the story between Senku and Tsukasa. Some people have taken this as to mean that Dr. Stone is gonna come to an end after this war is over. Now, I'm not saying it's not, but I just don't think it will be over by the time this war is finished, and I want to kind of go into why I think that, but I also want to speculate maybe on what I think is gonna actually happen in the future of Dr. Stone, because there's a lot of ground to cover that hasn't been touched on yet, or at least potential ground to cover. I mean, there's no guarantee that these things are gonna happen, of course. It is merely me talking about what I think could happen, and certainly things that definitely should, or at least would bring a lot to the story. So the future of Dr. Stone. One of the things that I think people really sleep on is the source of the Petrification. It is something that hasn't really been brought up as of late, because we've been too busy reading the story during the war between Senku and Tsukasa that the Petrification hasn't really been even mentioned. But it is something that is hugely important to the story, because in chapter 1 Senku does mention that he intends to finding out the source. And as he's a scientist, you kind of have to expect that Senku, he wants to learn what was it that caused everyone on the planet, every human and every swallow on the planet to turn into stone. And why did it happen? And how did it happen? Even if you know what caused it, even if you know why, exactly how did this happen? It is something a scientist like Senku just wants to find out, and it was established in chapter 1 that this will be explored eventually. So unless the series gets cancelled or something like that, you should probably be expecting this series to be continuing for quite a while. Now, another thing that really needs to be mentioned is, of course, the fact that we've been exploring a speck of the planet. There's so much ground to cover in terms of surface area in Dr. Stone. World building is something that hasn't really been hugely touched upon either, because you have this area that they're in, basically where they grew up and where they lived back in the day, and now they're obviously thousands of years in the future, but it is still kind of the same place. We haven't heard much from any other country, right? We don't know anything about if there's any survivors in any other countries or anything like that, and that is really something that I'd like to know more about, because I find it's extremely unlikely that Senku and Taiju were the only ones that were able to free themselves from this petrification state, because even though it was this nitric acid in the cave that caused them in particular to actually be freed, or at least that's what they think it is, so we can probably assume that that has something to do with it. Some other people must have had similar conditions, right? At least at some point, at some part of the planet. I just find it so unlikely that there's only 2 people out of billions of people that were fortunate enough to have this happen to them. But then again, maybe that is the case. But if we do assume that there are other people around the world, there are going to be other colonies and other civilizations that have been formed, and there's no telling whether this is going to have happened at the same time, right? Because we don't really know if everyone would have been released at the same time as Senku and Taiju, because something that Senku really brought up in the first chapter was that they were actually being released at the same time. At least I think it was during the first chapters. It's at least at the very early stages of Dr. Stone. He brings up that they were being released from the petrification within 6 months of each other, which kind of like implies that the nitric acid had something to do with it, right? Because it was exactly around the same time, given the amount of years that had passed, over 3,000 years, and they were able to come loose within half a year of each other. There's no coincidence there, right? It has to be a connection, and that's what Senku knows. So I want to know if they're gonna actually explore that in the future, and I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that, because Dr. Stone is just one of those series that it heavily revolves around, you know, Senku creating the kingdom of science and rebuilding civilization, but there has to be some catch eventually, right? There's gonna be some other civilization out there that's gonna try to oppose Senku, or at least try to compete with Senku, kind of like Tsukasa is currently competing with Senku in the sense that they're trying to build two different types of civilizations. Tsukasa wants to build a civilization that revolves around strong and young men and women, you know, people who aren't as keen to bring back the old system. But Senku does want to bring back the old system because he loves science, and there's no other way to really do that than to bring back people who knows these sciences. But as I said, there's another thing that really needs to be explored, which is the source of the petrification. That is like the whole thing that Dr. Stone kind of like is built upon, because at the beginning of the story, of course, we learned that they were actually being petrified by some kind of event, as we see in one of the panels, where we can actually see what it looks like kind of an explosion that just spreads across the entire planet. But it didn't come from space as far as we know, because people in space weren't affected at all, as we know, from Senku's dad and everyone on that space station. So only people on the planet were affected, which kind of implies that it has to have been something on the planet that caused it. So I don't really think it's alien, to be honest, but who knows. Nah, but I really want to find out more about exactly what it is, and it is something that I know we are going to find out more about as long as the series doesn't get cancelled, which I seriously don't see happening, because Dr. Stone is doing quite well at the moment, so it's getting cancelled. I mean, compared to some of the other series out there, it's just not happening. One last thing that I really want to talk about is the anime, which hasn't happened, of course. We don't even have an announcement, but a few days ago I did reply to a tweet which gave quite a few replies, to be honest, because I mentioned that Dr. Stone announcement would be great, and you know, we got some people engaging with that tweet, and I do agree with a lot of people that I don't really expect Dr. Stone to be getting an anime for at least a year from now, but it would be very interesting to see whether we would get an announcement really soon that would really confirm that Dr. Stone is getting an anime, even if we do have to wait like an entire year to actually get to start watching it. I wouldn't really have a problem with that, to be honest, because at that point Dr. Stone would be having maybe over 120 or 130 chapters, so that would be quite interesting to see. Now, my biggest issue with the anime of Dr. Stone, if it ever gets one, or when it gets one, you know, where's the first season actually going to end? Because if you look at the story currently, there isn't really any clear position as to where you should end. Some of the good points where you could end the anime are far too early, in my opinion. And after those points, when you get to the whole thing with the Kingdom of Science, when he actually runs into the Ishigami village, you don't have any clear points to end unless you're actually counting after the Tsukasa war that we're currently having, which means that if they do want to go that far, they definitely have to cramp in a lot of chapters into 24-25 episodes, and that's assuming it is a full season and not like a 12 episode one. And I'm not really sure if I see that happening, given that, you know, Dr. Stone is not quite as big as some of the other animes, and looking at something like The Promised Neverland, it's only getting one core, and that's hugely popular. Dr. Stone is not quite as popular as The Promised Neverland, so I just don't see why they would give it even more freedom, you know, with 25 episodes, unless they figured, you know, there's no other way to adapt this manga into an anime. So I'm really curious, you know, whenever or if it ever gets an anime adaptation, you know, exactly what route are they gonna take, where they're gonna end it. It is something that I haven't really been able to really determine myself, because there are so few points where ending the anime would really make sense at all. Anyway, that's been me talking Dr. Stone. Just wanted to make a quick discussion, you know, about Dr. Stone and where it's heading in the future, if it's gonna end now or if it's gonna end far into the future. Personally, like I said, I think it's gonna end far into the future because of how it's set up, and this Tsukasa war is just one part of the story. So I would love to know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you're reading Dr. Stone, like, what do you think is going to happen next in the story once this war between Senku and Tsukasa is over? Do you think they're gonna go straight to the source of the petrification, or is some other obstacle gonna get in Senku's way on their way to getting there? And as always, if you did, be sure to Detroit smash that like button if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. This has been Chaotic Plus.